I would like to entertain any questions from the audience. We have a lot of time left, so or about any particular pictures in the show, or what I was experiencing at that time. Please feel free.
Yeah. Thank you for your wonderful presentation and also for your photographs. They're really powerful. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what it's like working with Walker Evans and what he was like personally. I teach a modern photography class, and we're going to be talking about Walker Evans after Thanksgiving break. So I'd love to hear some more about him.
I studied him as a special guest auditor in his Trumbull College seminar for undergraduates in photography in the fall-winter term of 1971-72. I had been photographing, and I had got sort of a minor reputation among my fellow students and some of the faculty. And at that time, Alan Trachtenberg, who later became one of the authorities on Walker Evans and who had just come to Yale, suggested I introduce myself to Walker at his class or at the seminar. And I was so naive as I didn't even know Walker Evans had been on the campus for something like 15 years already, because the connections between the graduate school and the art school were virtually none. So I said, oh, Walker Evans is here? Okay, I'll go up there. And I brought some of my photographs with me, and I met him at the door. And he said, do you have any photographs with you? I said, yes. And he said, by all means, come in. I later found out the students were very selective for who came in that class. So I was very lucky that he allowed me to participate in the seminar. And at the end of that term, that 2-hour seminar, the students started passing around the photographs. And so I modestly started passing mine around in the other direction because I was sitting right next to Walker. And when they came to him at the end, this is like an amazing moment. He said, who took these photographs? I said, I did. And he pointed to one of the students in the class who was a liaison with the art gallery. And he said, I'm going to have an exhibition, a one-man exhibition at the gallery in January, and I want to see if they would like to have some of your work in the show with me. So that was my introduction to Walker. So that momentous, really. I never forget that. So of course, every week I came in, I was doing new photographs. Couldn't wait to show him, and he was a kind man. He was a gentle man, and very sophisticated in literature. And he was a model, really, for when I started publishing my first photographs. I sought not photography magazines, but literary journals, because that's what he did. He published in Hound and Horn and some others in that early period. And so he was like a role model for me, and a great influence on my work. And I still remember that first hour or first 2 hours, because he was playing a tape of Robert Frank, who had been to Yale and given a talk at the university. And that, of course, Walker introduced Robert Frank's The Americans before it was published in a special annual, a photographic annual. And that's a collector's item now. It's published. It's U.S. camera in 1958. But Walker used to share his photographs with us. We'd pass them around the class. We handle them, look at them. He just passed them around, and he was particularly proud of the work he'd done at Fortune magazine in the 40s and the 50s. So I started collecting old Fortune magazines. They were available for a couple of dollars at a local bookstore, and I showed them to him. He was very pleased that I was collecting them. He was very proud of that work. And it was little known at the time, but later the Wesleyan University Museum, Wellesley Museum, published an exhibition of his work at Fortune. It's worth having. I think it's still available. But he was a very, very nice man, very gentle. He meant a lot to me. And we continued a relationship, not continuous, but when we ran into each other, he always wanted to know what I was doing. And near the end of my travels in 1974, I had a break, and there was a picnic, annual picnic at Old Lyme, a grounds that Yale University had for recreation. And he lived in Old Lyman. He made a surprise appearance. He usually didn't come to those. I'd been to many of them. He'd never been. And he saw me, and he made a beeline to the table where I was showing a box of my new prints to a bunch of people. And it was wonderful because they didn't know him. And he was coming up and looking, very eager to see what I'd done. And I remember particularly, there's one photograph that's not in the book that he liked very much, but the one that's in the show that he really responded to was the photograph of the Photomat girl from Louisville. That was the favorite of his, and he had an eye for nice-looking women too. So you can understand that. But yeah, it was a great relationship. It means a lot to me.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I also have one other kind of connection, which I should understand too, and that is the way that you introduced your photographs and the way the show is. I get a sense that those photographs could be rearranged in different ways, as they, in that, in a sense, the spectator is to go and kind of make interconnections, just as one does with the brilliant book by Walker Evans, American Photographs, where even though they're in parts and all that, there are interconnections and comparisons that can be made all throughout the series.
Yeah, well, that's really what I intended in the organization of the photographs in the book. I'm working on a sequel, which will be totally different because I don't think I can do this again in this way. The next book will consist of other photographs taken that summer. I took 750, and I'm just printing. I have a darkroom in my basement. I still believe in the beauty of the silver gelatin print, superior to the digital print, which I consider rather lifeless in comparison. But I'm printing some work that I never printed in the 70s, negatives that I never printed. I'm discovering some wonderful things. I even have them here. I brought some of them with me that I've done in the last month, and I'm very pleased with the richness and the tonalities. I've recovered my skills. I'm very proud of that. It took a while. But that next book will be strictly chronological. It's going to go according to the diary where I've recorded all of the photographs. And I plan to have some excerpts from my diary and from my letters, some scans, and also some scans of a 1974 road atlas so you can see where we're going, and each one is going to have the actual date of that photograph. So it'll make a sense in a different way, because right now you have an impressionistic sense of what I was doing. You have the dates, you have the places and where I photographed, but you don't really have an idea of the chronology. But that's not what I was intending in this exhibition and this book. So I'm moving forward with that. I think it'll take a few years, but I do hope to have a second book. Yes?
I admired your beautiful choice of words.
Oh, in my talk or?
Presentation.
Oh, thank you.
I thought you're either or both extraordinarily gifted with language, or you've had many wonderful teachers of language and literature, and a good memory for what you read and the rhythms and cadences of words.
Well, thank you. My real interest was American literature. And until I discovered photography, I did have literary aspirations. But when I discovered the power of photography as a medium of expression, that became it for me. But I do write. I enjoy writing. And I'm trying to do more of that now. And these talks that I've been giving are not extemporaneous. I've written them all down as if they might be published, perhaps, someday. So thank you for that.
Right. I was wondering if you'd say more about that, just to follow up. I know you've talked before about the fact that you regard photography as being closer to written word than to other visual
That's right.
arts. And you're not the only photographer trained in literature. Robert Adams comes to mind. But I'd wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, about the connection between the written word and the way the written word is structured and your approach to photography.
Yeah, that's a very good question. traditionally, curators and museums don't make this connection between literature and photography. They always compare it to paintings or visual images of other kinds, prints. I was not influenced by I'm very knowledgeable about the history of American art, and I've been a bookseller specializing in that field for almost 40 years. But I always felt that the literary impulse, the expression of that, because photography is more of a democratic medium, it's a reproductive medium, and it's one that it just comes from your confrontation of what you're thinking with what's out there. And with painting, you're handling a brush, you're handling materials, and it's a long process. With photography, it's something very different, but I'm very influenced by writers like Henry James. Henry James is my hero, really. But others like Wallace Stevens is a favorite of mine. And I look at their work and I see visual equivalence in their writing. And that to me is like my photographs have certain literary equivalents. But as I said, they're two separate spheres, visual and literary. But I have that impulse in me. I have that admiration for writers, perhaps more than I do for painters, because to me it's almost alien to what I was feeling, what I was doing. I wasn't dealing with brushes and paints and stuff like that, and taking a long time to design something. A lot of these pictures, you might say they're intuitive. They're composed, yes, but I took my time when I was taking them. I kind of knew what I was doing, but still, it's only a moment. It's only a moment in time. And, what do they mean? That's what I'm trying to get at. I don't know. I just know I've expressed something there. And I've held on to that desire after all these years. I knew I had something. I knew I had to publish it. I'm so fortunate to have these museums, and particularly Michael Panhorst from the Montgomery Museum of Art, who recognized that there was something there worth presenting. I mean, I haven't had shows or books or anything in 35 years, and I drove down to Montgomery and I said, I have a possible book, a possible show. I'd like you to see my work. There's a lot of it deals with the South. And he said, well, send me some JPEGs, send me some. I said, no, you have to see the original prints. You have to see the vintage prints, the ones I made in my darkroom. He says, okay. So a week later, I was down there. I drove down and left them overnight because I came a day early. And I said, well, I'm sorry, too early. So I left him with him the next day. He said, well, these are extraordinary. I think there will be a show, but we have to go through all the, the motions. But it happened, and it took one curator, as it took for Walker Evans, one person to inspire me and to recognize that there was something. Now I see there's a lot of people that relate to this. It's very, very pleasing, very wonderful.
I have heard that independent booksellers have a hard time against
That's right.
Amazon and
That's right. Bookselling used to be a lot of fun. It's not fun anymore. It's all internet. You don't even know your customers. I love bookselling. I love knowing the books, and I love knowing who they were, who the people were that were buying them, and the librarians as well. And now it's become so impersonal. So I'm putting more of my time into my art. I've now regained that excitement, that energy that I had 40 years ago, when I had to put all that aside for a while and make a living. But I'm okay now financially, so I'm pushing forward with these goals, these further goals. Bookselling I still have to do for the income, but I'm trying to spend more time with this type of thing.
Great, here.
Yes?
So you grew up in Florida, you went to Yale as an undergraduate, right? So
Graduate.
Hmm?
I went to Yale as a graduate
As a
student.
graduate student. So do you think that you had to leave the South for a while to come back and see it in the way that you see it in these photographs?
Well, my parents lived in Florida all those years, so I continued making numerous trips almost every year since I was a student at Yale. And of course, I almost always drove, and I saw a lot of the South. So to me, it's evolutionary change. It's not like sudden. After 40 years now, I see it differently. I don't really see that as an issue for me. And I have my ties. I have a lot of friends throughout the South. One of them that Bill mentioned, the Center for Study of Southern Culture in the South, Bill Ferris, was a longtime friend. He was at Yale when I was there. He was on the faculty, but he's my same age as me. And we've renewed our friendship after many years. And one of the projects that I had intended while I was traveling, and for which I brought some color transparency film, was to document folk art found along the road. And of course, he's become the leading scholar on Southern folk art and music. And so that never happened, but I do have some photographs from that were done specifically for that project with Bill Ferris. And so I was glad to see Bill mention that that center was started in Mississippi by Bill Ferris, and then he went over to North Carolina. So, yeah. Not a lot. I don't notice a lot of differences. Well, I guess there are. I guess someone asked me the other day, "Have you ever gone back to any of these places to examine them?" And I did. In the last 2 years, I revisited the National Cemetery for the Union Dead in Fredericksburg, Virginia. That photograph will be in my next book. It was published in Southern Cultures in their Civil War issue in 2013. And I went back and I rephotographed it. I found exactly the same spot where I was. It was an exercise, but it was interesting to go back. And one of the photographs in the show taken that same day was the woman standing in the doorway, also in Fredericksburg, and it's in the exhibition. So I went back. I had her address, so I went back to that address and I rephotographed the place without her standing in front of the door. The other one was Demopolis, because I said the place was teeming with shoppers when I was visiting there in 1974. It must have been, it might be called a market day. And I was going through that area, so I'll go back and see if I can find that spot where I photographed that man. Back here. And you can see the stately columns of the bank in the reflection in the window. So I looked for that bank. It was on the downtown Demopolis. There was just no one there. It was totally empty. The town was empty. All of the business had gone to the periphery, to the franchise restaurants and Burger Kings and whatever outside. So there was just nothing going on. That particular window was now the site of a pawn shop that sold just about everything, including guns and old photographs. The bank that was reflected in the window was now a furniture storage warehouse. So I did of course notice that changes like that, but those are changes that we all know about. We know that's happening everywhere. The franchisement of America or whatever. Yes?
It sounds like you put the photography away for a while and then you brought it back out. What were some of the emotions or memories that kind of came back as you were looking through the photography from a long time ago?
What was I feeling to look back?
Yeah, what were some like the memories or were the things that surprised you, maybe you kind of forgotten when you look at the pictures, kind of brought back memories or emotions?
Actually, I can remember almost the moment of almost every one of these photographs, just what was happening, how I was feeling. There's some that disappeared and some I can't remember being in those places. But in most of the cases where they were really intense, I do remember. I remember one thing that was important to me was that the people that I was photographing seemed natural, not posing or having me tell them what to do. So I often waited, I took my time. I was influenced in a way by the study of early American daguerreotypes, where the time to take a photograph was often seconds rather than a fraction of a second. And people had to be absolutely still. And I sought that stillness, that same stillness, because those photographs from the 1840s, those people look at you, they seem to be looking out from eternity. And I wanted something like that in the photographs that I was taking. So I waited sometimes interminably maybe for some of the subjects until they were relaxed or gave up their guard. And that's when I took the photograph. And I was telling Josh here earlier today that I rarely took more than one of any of the subjects, unless I knew the first one was not good. Then it was always the second one that was the one I wanted. In the case of the magnificent street corner preacher, totally dressed in white and holding white flags, street corner in Savannah, Georgia, downtown, with the McCurrys in the background. I mean, he just knew he was stunning. He was preaching, and well, it was just fantastic. And so I had to photograph him. And then I actually took 4 of him. That's more than I ever took of anybody in my life. But I knew the first 3, he was posing for me. He was acting. He was like preaching to me. And finally, he stopped doing that. And then the 4th one was when he resumed preaching to whoever was out there. And nobody was really listening to him. But that was the 4th one I took. And that's the one that's in the show. But I had to get that. I had to get that picture. So, yeah. Yes?
The trip didn't end where you initially planned it to end.
No.
So at the time, did you see that as a setback, or was it just something that
Interesting. Yeah, we had hoped to get all the way out to California. I don't know how we could have done it. We didn't have much money. I have a twin brother out there. We were going to stay with him. But the money was running out, and when it looked like the car was not going to be repaired, we did stay 10 days in Kansas City, favorite city of mine ever since. And I finally decided I had to take the train back, and I thought, it's over. 6.5 weeks travel, my attempt to photograph all of America, it's ended. So my friends who were supposed to come here today from Kansas City, fortunately they had to cancel their flight at the last minute. They're the ones I stayed with, and they took me to Union Station, the train station, which you see in one of the photographs. And in that photograph, there are 2 people huddled together against, I don't know, a pole or something like that, 2 elderly people with luggage, and there's a large faceless clock in the background, and everything is, there's no nature in there. It's all concrete. It's almost like death. I hadn't thought of that until Alex Nemerov wrote in his essay the image that reminded him of a necropolis in ancient Egypt. And I thought about that. In a way, it was the death of my dream. It was over, but it wasn't. Because I resumed traveling again with that wonderful job as an ID photographer. I would visit these places. I would revisit certain places in the South. I went back down to Florida, to North Carolina, to Arkansas, and then also up to Chicago and Evanston and Ohio and Pennsylvania. So I kept photographing in between assignments and during my rush hours because I continued to explore whatever was out there. So it wasn't over. And it's still not over. It's still not over.
Ray,
Yes?
what were some of the things you photographed in the very
No. I had a friend from Stetson, not in my class or year, but she was dating a fellow who wanted to come up to New Haven, do his mini-mester term, and live with me for a month. I guess that was around 1967, 68. And she was a photographer. Her name is Sage Redding. And she came up to visit, and the next summer she came to try out her luck in New York. And they got an apartment together in New York City. And she was hoping to make it as a photographer up there. Well, I never met a real live photographer before, except the ones that came to do your yearbook portraits. You know, I really didn't know any photographers. I never knew you could print photographs, you could develop them. And I was so excited by what she was doing. And printing photographs, wow, in black and white. I thought that was amazing. I wanted to do it. I wanted to learn that. So I didn't take up photography until, I guess it was around 1969. And I was just very excited about it. It was like magic. When you saw those first pictures coming in, developing, you know, in the tray, and you're seeing that negative come up and form, it is like magic. And it still is like magic. I can't imagine doing the digital thing where they just automatic. You see them right away. Something about that waiting and seeing what's coming up, emerging. It's a miracle. And so I became hooked. And soon it became an obsession. When I discovered the work of Walker Evans, first I was keen on photographing all my friends and whatever. And then I started studying the history of photography, and I found that I was really drawn to Walker Evans' work. And when the chance came to study with him, I had already been exploring some ideas that I had with my newly acquired twin lens Minolta reflex camera. And my first photographs that I was proud of were those made with that camera. The ones I took with a 35 millimeter, I have the negatives, but they're just like whatever, you know, friends and all that. But then I started getting serious when I saw what that camera could do. I started looking at sidewalks and windows, storefront windows, and bridges and scenes across the river of industrial towns in Connecticut, and those fascinated me. So those were the first photographs that I showed to Walker Evans, including a series of views of interiors of antique stores. They were really like junk stores. He was fascinated by all that stuff that was in the windows, and also the light. I was very interested in the way the light reflected from the window and the inside. I thought of glass as a kind of a magical material where it paralleled the camera lens. The glass was the material itself, and then what was behind it was what you saw through it, so the photographer sees what's there, but also it reflected, so it reflected back to the photographer, it reflected what was across the street. That fascinated me. It was very symbolic in a way. So I was very interested in photographs of windows and stores and seeing what was inside, see what was outside. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes?
You mentioned several times the writing that Alex did, where how that brought out a lot of the pictures, a lot of stuff you didn't even see in the picture. Did y'all know each other before you did that writing? Or it seems like y'all have a lot in common, or y'all look at things very similar.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the first part of your question.
You were talking about in the book, the person that did the writing in the book, I think his name was Alex.
Alexander Nemiroff. His father's a very well-known American poet, Howard Nemiroff, and his aunt was a very famous photographer named Diane Arbus.
It sounds like his writing and your photography really matched well together, and he brought a lot out of your photography.
Oh yeah.
Did y'all know each other before, or how did y'all?
We were neighbors on the same block, and he knew of my work as a writer. Something I published back in 1976 on photography in a magazine called American Art Review. And when we first met, he said, "Oh, I just love that article you did on woman Eva Newell, and he quotes that in the book. He refers to that. And he was the first person that ever said they read that article so many years later. I mean, people then read it, but I was very impressed. But he's a wonderful writer, and his newest book, Silent Dialogues, is a very personal book. It's a comparison of the work of his father as a poet and the work of his aunt, his father's sister, Diane Arbus, whom he never knew personally, never met. But it's a beautiful short book in about 5 chapters, and he just loves Diane Arbus. She was an influence on me too, but I try to distance myself from some of the ideas of being photographing freaks or grotesque. I thought everyone was photographable, everyone was interesting, and I was not out to sensationalize anything. But her influence on me was she used the same kind of camera, she used the same kind of paper to print her work, beautiful prints. And she also confronted people. She came up close. And that probably is her biggest influence on me. You don't want to imitate Diane Arbus. There's no one like her. But that was her influence. And to make this connection with her nephew so many years later, it's a wonderful relationship. We write back and forth to each other, and we share each other's writings. And I'm very. He actually came here to the University of Georgia.
Yes, he's come and he's spoken here at the museum.
Yes, he's an incredible speaker, very inspiring. He can talk for an hour and he just entranced.
Well, I'd like to invite everyone to step outside. Raymond's offered to sign some books if you have a copy, or you're welcome to purchase one in the gift shop. And then if you want to go to the gallery, and we can have more informal discussion up in the gallery if you like as well. And I think we still have a few treats up on you too. Refreshments.
Thank you. Thank you very much.